Masks of the Masquerade by xxImpressions. Chapter 1. Humored shushes rang out from the three Bridgerton brothers as their carriage scurried up the driveway to their neighbor's ball. They reminded themselves to keep their voices low and their laughter muffled until they at least reached their secret forbidden destination. Given that they were all slightly underage, their out-of-town parents had left strict instructions for them to avoid any evening parties since no one was available to chaperone. Unfortunately for the Lord and Lady Bridgerton, their three eldest sons could not resist the temptation of attending the highly talked-about Masquerade ball, given that all of the necessary pieces seemed to fall into place. Their parents were on a trip to see some acquaintance or other get married. Due to the time, the family's governess had put the younger Bridgerton children to sleep ages ago, which meant all they needed to do was arrive with their faces covered by masks after sneaking out, which gave them the additional advantage of having their identities concealed should their parents become curious enough to ask around about who was in attendance tonight. Of course, to no one's surprise, the whole thing had been Colin's idea. But once he had convinced Benedict they should go, it was easy for them both to gang up against Anthony in order to persuade him to attend as well. Convinced by the low probability of getting caught, and the glass of brandy one of his brothers had put in his hand, the eldest Bridgerton son had requested their carriage, and they were soon part of the group of many heading to their neighbor's ballroom. With Aubrey Hall's estate bordering their hosts, it struck Anthony as odd that he knew very little about the family whose house he would soon be entering. From what he had gathered, the extravagantly beautiful, but empty estate had recently been let by a peer of good standing, his wife, and their only child, a daughter. Aside from that, no one knew much else. The room was already crowded with guests as more poured in, and Anthony supposed, having now entered the lively soiree with his brothers on either side of him, that their host's elusiveness was the very reason most people showed up tonight. And while he could understand their natural curiosity, he was only in attendance to watch over his rambunctious siblings more than anything else. Or at least, that is what he thought he was doing until he took a glance to his left moments after entering the great hall, only to see that Colin was no longer standing beside him. Immediately turning to his right in order to ask Benedict if he had noticed where their younger brother had gone, Anthony was hit with the instant understanding that this whole night had been a setup once he saw the second eldest Bridgerton had also disappeared without a word. Letting out an exasperated sigh upon having such a realization, the eldest of the three decided to make his way to the refreshment table in order to enjoy some punch instead of searching out either of his accomplices. With a drink in hand, the heir to one of England's most reputable viscountcies chose to look around the room in a futile attempt to spot one of his brothers. In not catching so much as a glimpse of either of them amongst all of the masked faces, Anthony annoyedly turned his gaze upwards to ask the heavens above to give him some patience. But in doing so, Anthony found himself lucky enough to be the only one who seemed to notice the ethereal figure watching the party from the shadows of the halls above. Given the main gathering was confined to their host's ballroom on the ground floor, he could not help but to wonder what this person was doing up there on the wraparound balcony that overlooked the entire room. The lady, whomever she may be, was clearly dressed for the ball with her elegant mask covering her face and matching her outfit, much like his. However, even from this distance, he could infer from the strange beauty trying to go unnoticed that she watched the festivities with an unfamiliar, but obvious yearning in her countenance. This made Anthony all the more curious when her observing gaze eventually fell upon him. He watched as she seemed to realize someone had caught her in her observations, then hurriedly turned her face from the light in an attempt to conceal herself from his view and quickly disappeared into the shadows above. At that point, the future Viscount could no longer deny his immense intrigue. Seeking out the staircase that led to the second level of the ballroom, he cautiously made his way down the dimly lit corridor to where he had last seen the entrancing figure that had unwittingly captured his attention. Luckily, he knew he was heading in the right direction as his ears had picked up on the sounds of a hushed conversation taking place around the corner from him. Not wanting to reveal himself before he was sure it was her, Anthony hesitated from making the turn and instead chose to conceal his presence behind the bend in order to listen in on what he was hearing.
"Goodness, Sophie,"
you said with a hopeless sigh.
"it bewilders me that my father will put all this effort into a party for mere strangers, yet he will not lift a single finger when it comes to my health. Instead, he has simply resigned himself to the belief that he will never have grandchildren because my condition apparently renders me ineligible for marriage."
Unsure of what to make of those opening words, the eldest Bridgerton son quietly pressed his back to the wall behind him and continued his eavesdropping as you let out a huff of frustration while your dearest friend responded to you.
"Oh lovely girl, most earls would be so very glad to have a daughter as unique as yourself. It is his loss if he does not recognize how fortunate he is."
It was then that Anthony took a chance to peek around the corner in order to catch the slightest glimpse of you. You, in all of your finery for the evening, were giving who he presumed to be Sophie a grateful smile as you amicably said,
"You are a true friend, thank you,"
before laying an appreciative, gloved hand on her shoulder. Briefly hiding your expression from her view by glancing towards the party just getting started below, you took a fortifying breath as if steeling yourself against something. Then, after putting on an encouraging air, you turned back to face your kind companion with a convincing smile now on your face.
"Go down to the party, Sophie. I'll be perfectly fine up here for now. You and I both know you do not have many opportunities for fun, so you should enjoy yourself tonight."
Your friend seemed to consider your suggestion for a moment, and then apprehensively said,
"Only if you are sure, my lady."
After giving a confident nod, she returned your appreciative smile while bowing and began to make her departure. It was when you thought no one was watching that you allowed your serene mask to slip into an expression that showed your true feelings of deep sadness. Having to hide yourself away as others had fun simply because your father had commanded it so, was not always an easy burden to bear. Unwilling to allow the obvious emotions you felt to dwell any longer on your remarkable face, Anthony finally stepped around the corner into view and announced himself by clearing his throat. You turned to face him with evident surprise at his entrance, and the heir to the Bridgerton viscountcy watched as your eyes widened in recognition at the sight of him, given that you had just seen him standing downstairs across the ball. Raising his hands in a sign of peace and giving you a moment to show he meant no harm, Anthony began to say with a touch of nervous uncertainty,
"My apologies for disturbing you. Truly. It is just."
He gave a brief pause as he contemplated how to continue, only to hear the following question come from his mouth.
"I was wondering if you might like to join me for a dance."
And the air around you both seemed to shift into something unexpected as you contemplated your response in return. End of chapter 1.